All right, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world right now. And welcome to today's Distinguished Entrepreneur Series event hosted by the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the University of Chicago. My name is Star Marcello. I'm the Deputy Dean for MBA programs here at Chicago Booth and former, until very recently, Executive Director of the Polsky Center. If you're joining us today, I hope you are doing so out of an interest in innovation, maybe in economic development, in leadership, and in community. Entrepreneurship, unlike some other fields of study and practice, isn't an industry. It's a way of thinking and a way of approaching and solving tough problems. And of course, I think this makes it uniquely compatible with the University of Chicago's commitment to deep inquiry. And perhaps it also explains why the entrepreneurial community here at the University of Chicago has grown so strong over the recent years, with now 74% of the MBA class earning a concentration in entrepreneurship, which makes it the highest, most popular concentration at this school. And through the hundreds of companies launched in collaboration with the Polsky Center through programs like our New Venture Challenge. And of course, I can't say those words without calling attention to some of our success stories to date, including Grubhub, Braintree, Venmo, Simple Mills, Tovala, and many others. And in a minute, you will hear from an entrepreneur who has embraced this kind of thinking and has made a huge impact in all of our lives as an innovator. This talk and the Distinguished Entrepreneur Series mission is to advocate for innovative thinking across all fields of study and industry. It's meant to inspire and to challenge students, staff, faculty, alumni, and others at the university to reflect on some of the biggest problems they experience in their lives and to give them permission to solve them. Through prominent voices, we hope to expand how people define and understand innovation and entrepreneurship. Instrumental to the start of this series is Chicago Booth alum and serial entrepreneur Manish Kothari. Manish has partnered with the Polsky Center to identify important voices in entrepreneurship and to bring them here to the university. And we are so grateful to Manish for his continued involvement and support of the school. And in just a minute, I'm going to pass the mic over to him. But before I do, just a tiny bit of brief housekeeping. We are recording this event. It will be viewable afterwards on the Polsky On Demand channel. If you don't know where that is, you'll probably get a note from the Polsky Center directing you to it. We will open up for questions for Reid Hoffman and Dean Rajan about halfway through the program. You can submit a question using the Q&A button on your screen. It should be at the bottom. And my colleague, Lucas Peralta, who you heard from at the beginning, will be the voice of the questions, and you'll hear him when we open for Q&A. Thank you, Lucas, for all your support also in managing this event and bringing it together. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Manish Kothari.
Thank you, Star. And thanks to the folks at the Polsky Center, Lucas and others, as well as Reid's assistant, Saida, for helping organize this event. I am honored to introduce our speakers today. Today's host, as you heard, is Dean Rajan. In addition to being the Dean, he is the George Schultz Professor of Accounting at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Today's distinguished entrepreneur is Reid Hoffman. I first met Reid probably a couple of decades ago, thanks to my brother Ketan, while both of them were working at Apple. Reid is both a quintessential and an inspirational entrepreneur. In 1997, years before the term social network had become familiar, he founded his first startup, social.net. And while it was probably ahead of its time, and I know that there were struggles, Reid learned many useful lessons that he would then use and use successfully for several future endeavors. During that time, I remember that he also started to help his friend Peter Thiel at PayPal. He joined PayPal as COO, and he oversaw all of the external relationships. While it's actually quite common for entrepreneurs to wear multiple hats at startups, the hat that to me best describes Reid's role at PayPal at the time is probably that of a firefighter. He has some amazing stories from that time. I remember him telling Ketan and myself. And I know that he put out some very complex fires. PayPal was acquired by eBay in 2002. At not long after, and because of his strong conviction in networks, he co-founded LinkedIn. He has helped grow and lead LinkedIn through its IPO in 2011 and its subsequent acquisition by Microsoft in 2016. Today, LinkedIn is a very familiar household term. I assume all of you are members. It's the world's largest professional networking service with over 250 million monthly active users and over 100 million daily active users. Reid is also an Uber networker. What is perhaps less well known, or at least a little less well known, is that he introduced Mark Zuckerberg to Peter Thiel, and that it was Peter and him who wrote the first angel checks to Facebook. So in addition to being a very successful serial entrepreneur, Reid is a very successful venture capitalist in his capacity as member at Greylock, as a partner at Greylock. We were fortunate that Reid was our board chair at Edmodo, a company where I worked for several years. And what we appreciated a lot about Reid is that we knew his advice and insights as a board member often came from lessons that he had learned along his entrepreneurial journey. And we found these to be invaluable. He not only serves on Microsoft's board, but also on several private company boards and not-for-profit boards. In addition, he is a prolific and terrific author and podcaster. I highly recommend his writings and his talks for their very candid and indispensable advice, especially for entrepreneurs. I'm very, very grateful that Reid is both a mentor and an ally. Please join me in welcoming both Dean Rajan and Reid Hoffman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manish, and thank you, Reid, for being here. Maybe I'll just start with going back to some of the stories Manish was saying. What drew you first to social networks as an idea, as an industry?
The funny thing is some people who go into entrepreneurship, especially here in Silicon Valley, tend to be technologists first. Like they just love technology. It's like, this thing or that thing about it, or they started coding when they were 10 and loved coding. And for me, I've always been much more of a humanist. That's part of the reason why my undergraduate at Stanford was the single symbolic systems, which is cognitive science, artificial intelligence, did a master's degree in philosophy from Oxford. And so it's really people that did it. And part of the reason why the kind of the social networking part, SocialNet, even actually the interest in PayPal in ways, but also, LinkedIn and obviously, Facebook, investing in Airbnb, all these things, is how do you redefine our network of people in ways that both benefit the individuals and benefit society, and that you get the both benefits compounding together. And that was what interested me in technology, because technology had this ability to redefine it. Like if you wanted to be geek a little bit, it's almost like Star Wars and the Force that binds us all together and how we do that. But it's that sort of thing. And by the way, even inventions can sometimes do that too. So I've since broadened some of my investing to not just be pure, very focused people kind of technology, but other things too. Because like for example, you say, well, technology is a lever for climate change, so doing a little bit of investing with breakthrough energy ventures and fusion and fission and ways of doing that to be broader. But it all starts for me about what is the future of humanity and what are the ways that we can improve that using technology as the Archimedean lever. And then I happen to be a theorist around things that intersect psychology, philosophy, economics, sociology, in how we operate as individuals within our ecosystems and societies.
So if you think about one of the things our students are always interested in is, what did you see as sort of a pain point that you were trying to solve with an idea, right? So if you think about founding LinkedIn, for example, was there something, because you had started a social network, what was it that at that time said, LinkedIn might be something that you want to start?
Well, so it is very classic that, and a lot of great entrepreneurial companies come from, I see this problem, I have a product or a solution, and I can do it. And that is a very classic genesis that's valued and a worthy pursuit. I'm a little different in that what happened is I had this theory about how kind of the internet and kind of electronic space redefine physical space, and that could really change, be a platform and change. And so SocialNet was, hey, it could change for dating, it could change for roommates, it could change for like golf partners or tennis partners, and you could have all these different things where you're looking for that right connection for you, and that the electronic space could find that right connection for you. And one of the products that we had launched was in SocialNet was a thing called Working Network, which never worked. It was a non-working network. It just didn't work itself. It didn't fit the thing. And I was looking at it and I went, well, actually, in fact, this whole kind of anonymous profile to matching is not something that works in the work arena. It is, and so you begin thinking about real identity as a platform for new kinds of applications. And the other thing I learned on entrepreneurship was to be contrarian, but right, and be a little early. Like you don't want to be massively early, but a little early. And I said, well, between all of the different SocialNet things, the Working Network thing is one of the things that most people think is kind of crazy right now, but actually, in fact, is the way the world should work. So if I can figure out a way to get there, we should do that. Now, you can back that out into pain points and use cases, because the pain point and use cases would be like, well, oh my God, we live in this world of, Chicago, renowned for its economics, in this highly inefficient economic world where talent and opportunity is like shrouded in secrecy, right? Like the talent and the opportunities, whether it's employees and companies, or whether it's two deals between people, or whether it's entrepreneurs, should all in fact actually live in a world where there's a lot more transparency and liquidity for making it happen. But we had all these cultural norms of, oh, you post your resume and you're kind of disloyal to your institution, so you don't do that. But it makes the whole market like dark and illiquid and everything else, and that's terrible. And she said, okay, that's the way the world should be. Now, how do we get there? What's the things we do? And so we started building in order to get there. But it wasn't like we kind of had this story about like how I tried to hire people in Japan, and it was really difficult. Of course, it was really difficult hiring people in Japan from Silicon Valley. But the real thing was redefining the ecosystem, and because I'm a theorist that way.
Mm-hmm. And so if you look at social.net and then LinkedIn, PayPal in the middle seems a bit anomalous. So I was just curious about sort of what took you there. And also, finance, banking is an industry people think it's hard to be an entrepreneur in because of all the regulations. So how did you manage to sort of get around those things?
So I started SocialNet, my very first entrepreneurial experience, and kind of one of those massive things where like every Friday there were things I wish I knew on Monday, and it wasn't how the world was going to play out, just what the skill of entrepreneurship is, because I had thought I had prepped by going to Apple and Fujitsu and learning specific skills, and I was learning the V1 to V1 and V1 to V2 game, and actually the V0 to V1 game, like lots of new things. Mm-hmm. And so I had been telling my friend Peter Thiel about all my learnings, right? I was like, and here's what I learned last week, and here's what I learned last week, and here's what I learned last week. And they're not like oh, I should have hired so-and-so or shouldn't have hired so-and-so. It's like actually just raw, how do you play it? So when he and Max Levchin got together to start PayPal, which started as a company called FieldLink, which was a terrible idea, Peter came to me and said, look, Max and I decided we want to put each of our best friends, most knowledgeable friends on the board for this. Will you do it? And I said, well, like FieldLink's a terrible idea, but you're a really good friend of mine, so I'll join the board and I'll help you with this. But your idea of an encryption platform on mobile phones, it's not going to work. So let's, I'll help, but it's, fine. And then we iterated through to it. And actually, one of the funny things about how this works is Max Levchin, everyone claims that he came up with the idea, but it was actually Max Levchin. And he came up with a response to a question I was asking, which is, they were kind of like, there was a set of questions which evolved the idea from encryption platform on mobile phones to cash on mobile phones to cash on Palm Pilots. And I said, hey, look, here we are in Silicon Valley, Palm Pilot Central. Probably very few people on this call even know what a Palm Pilot is at this point. And so, but your use case is going to work. The splitting the dinner tab, the classic use case, because you should think in use cases, pain points, or you mentioned as a portion of design and RFPs, not going to work. And Max said, that's easy. We can sync by email payments. And we're like, that's a good idea. We should do that. Right. And that's how the PayPal came about. And that's how, and then it started taking off, and Peter came to me and said, hey, we need a whole bunch of help. We're trying to figure out this whole like financial industry thing. And like when we started the email payments, Peter, Max, myself, we didn't know like chargebacks on credit cards. We didn't know what those were. And so the anyway, so that's how I got into to PayPal and payments, and I learned a whole bunch about payments, and that's part of learning new things. But of course, look, what's the network vision? Well, enable every individual to become their own small business merchant was part of the idea behind PayPal, because like it was only for large businesses, but if you want to enable a network of entrepreneurship, and that's part of the reason why we took off on eBay, is enable individuals to participate in this new network, this new market system. And that was part of the PayPal idea.
If you look at social networks now, I mean, are you stunned by just sort of how much they have grown and the influence that they've had, or is that something that you thought could happen, just theoretically at least, in your mind?
No, actually, I'd say there's definitely learnings and things that you didn't expect to happen, and things you did expect to happen and didn't happen. And that all definitely plays into this. But I would say that probably the very key insight that led to LinkedIn and a bunch of the other things was that what matters is people and our real world identities and our real world networks. Because like prior to what is called Web 2.0 or Internet 2.0, I was calling it Internet 2.0. Web 2.0 is a better name. That was coined later. Is your real identities and your real relationships as platform for the applications that help you navigate your life, help you navigate your work, etc. And that's what like most fundamental to us, is what gives us meaning and purpose and satisfaction. It's what, life is a team sport, not an individual sport in terms of how we go through it. And so I knew that's what was going to happen. And then the question is just how it got established and how we moved from what was previously described as cyberspace and other kinds of things to, no, this is just part of our life. It's part of how we operate. And, surprises include like, the invention of the iPhone and how mobile then becomes the central driving force of all this, not just the desktops. And also, like, for example, I guess what's probably more of a surprise is like when you launch these things, just like you launch the internet, you start with like the early adopters are all of the idealists, and you're not bringing all of society with you. So early, it just looks like pure creativity and vocal expression and all the rest. And then once all of society moves on, these networks become reflections of our society. So you say, well, our society has problems with political partisanship. Our society has problems with racism. Our society has problems, and then it gets reflected, and then that's not surprising once all of society gets into it, because it's essentially a mirror. Now we try to change the mirror so it helps transform us and put us on a journey to something better, and I think that's what the iterative work looks like. But I'd say that was the depth of the impact was definitely not surprising.
So maybe I'll ask you a bit more on that and then go back to how you think about investing, which is now there has been, as you say, the networks now reflect society, and some people have been shocked by that. Some people have been shocked by just the impact these networks have had, for good or bad. And there is talk of regulating them. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think regulation can ever succeed, or is it sort of a doomed mission?
So the classic challenge for regulation, and regulation sometimes is super important, but you have to it's so often approached in a political way versus a how do you get to the future? Because the general challenge in regulation is frequently its shape is to enshrine the past against the future, and yet it's the future that you want to get to, and of course you want to get to the good future, not the bad futures, and how do you steer between them? And so, do I think that there is ways in which regulation could mix into kind of the social networking space and improve things? Yes. Do I think that the way that most of this dialogue tends to work towards that? No. Look, what you'd say is like, well, okay, what do you want? Right? Well, what you want is you want the media systems that we're part of, by the way, social networks included, but also, of course, talk radio and cable news and all the rest, to progressively help us get to a bridges by which we are having the mutual discovery of truth and like what is actually in fact working. And you say, well, you want to do that, but you want to do that without having a centralized function, like, you know, either in the company or else saying, this is truth, and you're going to believe me. I'm going to tell you what truth is, and that's what truth is. You wanted to actually have a function that you trust, that feels relatively objective, not particularly partisan in one function or another. And by the way, you have to acknowledge that there'll be footfalls and errors, and you have to get there. And that's part of the reason why, like as a defender of free speech, I'm not a defender of free speech because I think it's a do or die right. I'm a defender of free speech because it's how we get to truth. So, you know, like my free speech to be able to say the earth is flat, not so relevant, right? My free speech to be able to say, hey, I think that we should have a society that's ordered on a set of principles that embraces diversity, where, by the way, 100 years ago, that would not have been as welcome, isn't a really important thing. And so I think that's the kind of thing to do. Now, can we get there? Yes. I think what we all need to do as leaders is try to influence getting there as a society without the heavy-handed regulation, because heavy-handed regulation tends to be more limiting and destructive. So, for example, a classic one would say, we should treat all these social networks as publishers, because that's, of course, what publishers want, because we want to shift it all back to the publishing paradigm. Well, that means a lot of individual voices won't be heard, right? And we won't have that space and dialogue for that. Is that really what we want? Or do we want to figure out, okay, well, it's not publishers, but it's some other version of truth-seeking, so the people who are hacking or people who are deliberately disseminating falsehood, or the people who are living in falsehood bubbles, that those generally shift wherever those are. And do so in a truth-seeking manner. Well, that would be good, but we need to figure out how that is, and that's what the dialogue is so far.
On balance, are you optimistic about the future of social networks, Reid?
Yeah, I mean, but to some degree, I'm intrinsically more optimistic. You know, part of the way I describe myself is I'm a techno-optimist, not a techno-utopian. I believe we can build through technology and other things very good and valuable futures. But we have to work at it. It isn't just because we can build the technology, it will work. It's how you shape it and how you make it work and how you integrate it in with society. And so, yes, is a short answer.
So Manish mentioned also you work for one of the oldest VC companies in Silicon Valley, in Greylock. Our students would love to know, how do you approach making a new investment? I mean, how do you kick the tires? What sort of process do you go through?
Yep. So there's plumbing and poetry in investment. And the plumbing is, depending on the zone you're in, is a set of things like how big is the market? Is the product or solution a good fit for the market? What's the risk discount on that? Is the entrepreneurial, the founders and the team around them capable of delivering? What does competition look like? You know, kind of what is the sequence of capital and capital efficiency? Will the business models you could potentially get to be worth the risk on the investment? And those are all things that kind of go into the plumbing of investment, which is super important in all skills you need to learn. And some areas you can stay very close to plumbing, like if you're doing enterprise investing or e-commerce investing, you can, generally speaking, stay pretty close to it. For me, I prefer, because I kind of redefining these network ecosystems and these human ecosystems, I prefer things that are more like, well, who knows if it's going to work at all or not, but if it does work, it'll be super important. That's one of the reasons why, like, you know, at Greylock, it was my very first investment at Greylock, and the partner, who is a storied partner, David Z, was my most valuable board member at LinkedIn. The reason I'm at Greylock, looked at me and said, look, every VC can have a deal that they can fail on, and Airbnb can be yours. And I was like, oh God, David's really smart. I wonder if I'm thinking about this the right way. And I thought through it, and I said, no, I still want to do it. And he said, great, you can do it. And then 6 months later, David came to me. No numbers had changed. It wasn't like it took years for the numbers to do the classic, you know, kind of power law curve growth. And he said, what did you see that I didn't see? You were right about this. And I said, look, you were right that there could be local regulation, that there could be various forms of market failure, that it was an odd thing for people to start doing. But if we got through all of those things, Airbnb would be huge. It'd be transformative to society, transformative to the host, transformative to the traveler. It's an entirely new and magical value proposition that doesn't exist in hotels and other kinds of things. And that was the thing that was like, if we could get there, it could be it. So for me, I tend to like this contrarian and right style of investing. And even that when, like very professional firms like Greylock have studied, we all do voting on deals, and we've studied the history of the deals that lead to the greatest outcomes. And the greatest outcomes are always mixed votes, where some of the partners are going, oh my God, we have to do this. And other partners are going, this is a bad idea, right? And by the way, those are also some of the craters, right? Yeah. But the greatest returns, and actually, in fact, when people frequently think, oh, do you regret investing in something that goes to zero? It's like, no. The regrets are always missing the amazing. The real thing is missing those amazing companies, those amazing products. That's the thing that's super important. And so the contrarian and right, which is a combination of art, because like, well, will Airbnb work? Like, because when we invested, I think there was like hundreds of stays a week. It was just tiny. It was kind of this concept for what could be built into the future.
And how much do you stay involved in an investment you make? Do you like follow up with them? Or are you sort of more hands-on, or do you say like, I trust the team and it's up to them?
Well, it's entirely dependent on the specific deal and team and all the rest. There's a lot of different configurations. One of my cross-checks to make sure that the investment is about the team and not about you, that I run myself, is would I invest and then say, like, hey, call me in 5 years and let me know how it went. Because if I wouldn't, then I'm lacking some confidence in where the team is and so forth. Now, that being said, I always aspire to be transformatively helpful, whether I'm a board member or just an investor, because part of the joy of doing this is working with the teams in making these possible amazing futures. And most often, the classic kind of venture model, what Greylock practices very rigorously, is you pick a small number of investments and you work with them intensively. And so, I was on the board of Airbnb all the way through its going public. As part of the deal that we struck at the very beginning, it's like, hey, I'll be with you until you go public, and then you go public, and I'll be a friend. And look, I took a call from Brian Chesky last week to talk about a strategy element, because we're like close friends and always a friend and ally of the company. And so, but the part of, I think, what's important between entrepreneur and investor is, well, what's the level of depth? Because sometimes what you are looking for is a board member you can talk to every day, and sometimes you're looking for a board member that it is active and paying attention to the strategy, and you will respond when you call, but fundamentally is kind of like at your call and command. It can go that whole range, and then that's an important part of the how are we partnering as we go forward.
So you are a Silicon Valley lifer, if you will, right? I read in a book, which I'm sure you know about, that you were born in Stanford Hospital. And what do you see as the future of Silicon Valley? I mean, it periodically comes up, but you hear now rumblings that, people are moving, they're tired of California, so on and so forth. But where do you see this going?
So I think Silicon Valley is not in trouble. I do not think we have been at peak Silicon Valley. I think Silicon Valley, even with a bunch of people who have moved very noisily, I think it has the same network effects and gravity of all this capital and entrepreneurs and companies and technologies and universities and so forth. My hope from all of this is that it will give more chance for more areas to become, their own Silicon Valley variants, whether it's, Austin or Boulder or Chicago or New York or, a reconstitution of Boston or Seattle or all of these places. And I think that somewhat shift to the Zoom environment that we're living in, that diaspora, may then allow more of these to be, because I think the world would be better off. I think the US would be better off. I think regions would be better off to do that. But I don't think that's to Silicon Valley's detriment. I actually think it's to, like, in some sense, part of one of the things that's not often commented on in Silicon Valley is a part of the reason why world-changing companies come out of it is because within Silicon Valley, it's so competitive. There's a kind of a ferocious, ferocious competition for, like, for example, which of these social networks are going to work, and which of them are the right design for the world, and which of them, and there's intense competition going into it. Well, I think that competition is even better when it's a competition between, startups in Silicon Valley and startups in Chicago, and that those things, actually, in fact, creating really great global companies. And so that's what I would say is my hope.
And speaking of Zoom, which all of us, unfortunately or fortunately, have had to spend a lot of time on, how has that changed the way you do your job? I mean, can you do due diligence via Zoom? What do you miss from the travel part?
Well, we have been. It's unusual because part of the thing is that you're like, I've done my first investment. It's still stealth currently with founders that I've never met in person, that we've only spent time talking to each other in Zoom. Now you should always do reference checking, and you should always do all that kind of thing. And you just have to put extra energy into both building the relationship and rapport, and also in the reference checking to make sure it's right, because you lack other signals, so you have to intensify in others. One of the things that's been a kind of a surprise over the last 12 months has been how much that's been generally true across the entire venture industry. Like, if anything, like what we found is the deal flow has been going, extremely fast. We have found that we've invested a little bit more, moderately more, in companies that are not headquartered in Silicon Valley, because when you're doing this, you're like, okay, now you're still paying attention to it because you want to get to these growth stages and the talent network and the capital networks and other things that get to that, how will that be playing out, and you're paying attention to how you help. But it's been fully active, but in a, kind of moderately modified way, because of our, kind of our video conference mode of existence.
So a lot of our students think about entrepreneurship maybe right out of their MBA or later. Do you have any advice for them? Given what you've learned over time, would you say wait a while, go to like you did to an Apple or Fujitsu, something like that? Would you say no, jump right in? What are your thoughts?
So I guess what I would say is, if you're very serious about entrepreneurship, you should get as close to it as possible. That was like, I had done hey, I'm going to be studied, I'm going to go to Apple, I'm going to go to Fujitsu. I had a list of skills that I wanted to learn about product market fit, product development, engineering processes, et cetera, et cetera. I was volunteering for new work and doing that. That was all a very good way of doing it. But I hadn't realized that I was learning the V1 to V1 and V1 to V2 game, not the V0 to V1 game. And so getting, and by the way, those are all useful to do. Getting knowledge about the V0 to V1 game. Like, if I were to call my younger self, I'd say, well, maybe go join a startup. Right? Don't just work at Apple and Fujitsu, but join a startup. And do that as kind of ways of getting there. Now, that being said, what you should really be is constantly on the hunt for, you have an active strategy about what your role is. Are you planning on being a founder? Then be on the hunt for that idea, on the hunt for your co-founders, because you don't know when the market and the idea and so forth. Be brutal about your own ideas. Like, I do this podcast, Masters of Scale. One of them, Mark Pincus, was how to kill your own idea. Like, how to kill your ideas is literally a critical component to generating good ideas. Because if you just kind of latch on the first one, you go, wow, I got this idea of this particular thing. Well, really, is that a good enough idea? Right? Because if you start in it, you're going to be in it for years, right? And a success case as an entrepreneur is like 5 to 20 years or longer. And so it's like, is this the right idea to be doing? And so you want to be refining nope, not that one. Nope, not that one. Nope, not that one. Now, by the way, you still will be taking risk. It isn't you're going to discover the perfect idea, but it's kind of refining that. And so being in that loop as early as possible is important. So those would be some touch points.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a whole bunch of questions. So I'm going to ask Lucas to step in and start asking some of the questions in the Q&A. Lucas?
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to say to the audience, you can use the Q&A tool to ask questions. There are a lot of people on this call, so we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we can. This first question is from Charush Sharma. You have built 2 massively impactful companies. Why did you decide to become a VC, and how do you define success at this stage in your career?
So I wasn't actually ever planning on being a VC. Part of what happened is I hired Jeff Weiner into LinkedIn, and I was thinking about what other stuff I would do next. And David Z came to me and said, hey, are you thinking about joining Greylock? And I said, well, I'm thinking a lot about how it is we launch, because we launch these companies of the future, and how we make more transformations, and how do we make this kind of technology company launch period more successful, and more like, as part of being more successful, have the kind of the beneficial impacts to society that we try to have. And he said, well, we love to do that. Greylock is part of our culture. Why don't you come join us? I was like, great. All right, I'll learn it that way. That's how I got into it. And the way that I think about my success these days is frequently which kinds of entrepreneurial projects, whether in commercial, so there's a variety of investments that I'm on the board of, kind of Aurora and Nauto and Coda and other things that I've done through Greylock. But also, I think of this as nonprofits, like Opportunity at Work, creating pathways for diversity and inclusion into the tech industry and tech jobs. Or at Greylock, we partnered with management leaders of tomorrow to bring people of color into venture and into the tech industry, and really strong executive roles and other kinds of things. And each of these are entrepreneurial projects. And so what I do think of now is I partner with CEOs and founders and founding teams, and I amplify them. And that allows me to do more projects, because one of the things when you're doing a startup, you're doing one, right? One with, you could do a little bit of investing on the side, but you're like it's kind of a question of like, what do you wake up every morning, and the first thing that you're working on every morning. And so that's part of what I've learned to do, and applying that kind of the template for how you build these companies in Silicon Valley, and modifying it to philanthropic projects, modifying it to social change projects. That's been the sort of thing that my growing on personal OKRs and success measures have become.
Thank you. We have another question from Boom. I'm an entrepreneur and a huge fan of your podcast. While describing your early entrepreneurial view, you mentioned your willingness to redefine an ecosystem. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs who aim to disrupt or reshape an industry and fundamentally change human behavior, but doing so while remaining grounded in current realities as they work towards their vision?
Well, you have to maintain in current realities, otherwise you don't get there. So usually, one of the reasons there's a lot of parallels between business and kind of call it military strategy. So I use the parallels to it mostly to understand it. Obviously, some people get weirded out by the military metaphor, but it's really entirely about construction here, not destruction. And so it's kind of like Marines take the beach, Army takes the country, police governs the country, 3 stages of ecosystem. And so you have to have a strategy for each of the 3. On the Marine side, it's like, look, how do people start getting engaged in your ecosystem? What are the early use cases? Why are they there? What are they doing? Why is it rewarding to them? What is the thing that starts getting it generated? Army is, okay, now how does it become mass market? How does it become a part of a much larger ecosystem? The positive incentives, as I was referring to it earlier when I was talking with the dean about this, as you begin to get the negative elements in your system too, how are you balancing to positive impact for the individuals in society doing it? And then how do you govern it as a steady state ecosystem that's generative? And you have to have, you absolutely have to have the Marine strategy down, because otherwise you're never going to get there. And you should be thinking about your police strategy, even if, by the way, you shouldn't overly define it at the very beginning, because you don't know what the path is. Will this beach actually get you there? Right? Or you're gonna have to try a couple other beaches, or you're gonna really refactor how you're thinking about it. You're going off to this other landmass instead as a way of doing it. And so those are the kinds of ways you think about it. So it's like now and the there. And by the way, there's kind of this yin and yang of entrepreneurship. It's like short-term and long-term, right? Immediate recruiting and recruiting for the future. This product use case and the product use case when you're getting to scale. And that's part of what makes it a difficult journey. It's not easy, and there's a lot of art, not just science to it.
Here's a really fun question. This is from Paul Seidler. I recently read the book Ready Player One for the first time. Reading this book during the pandemic was fascinating, considering my family and I have been working and attending school virtually for the past year. To what extent do you see education and remote work taking place in an immersive VR environment in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, I think it's been greatly accelerated by the pandemic. So it's been a dream for a while. The Ready Player One was kind of actually, in fact, a kind of a novelization of things that companies have started on and people have been talking about for a long time. I mean, earlier, the Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson and just like tons and tons of this stuff. And part of the reason why the adoption is never there, there's been this kind of like start the virtual world idea, crash, start the virtual world idea, crash, like literally cycles of them. We may be on cycle 7 or 8 now for the number of times that this has been tried by the entire industry, birthing a whole bunch of efforts to try to make it happen. And part of it's just kind of consumer adoption, because consumers kind of go, well, actually, in fact, I kind of like school in person. I kind of like, or I'm much more confident about medicine in person and so forth. And now, because we've been forced to, it's like, okay, what are the things actually, in fact, really work and we should really iterate? And what are the ways that we can do it as a balance? And so now people's familiarity with it, whether it's, life and entertainment, whether it's education, whether it's work, whether it's medical, all these things are now, like, people are now much more familiar with it. And by the way, that's also changing regulatory frameworks to allow more of it to happen, where the regulatory frameworks earlier in education, medicine, usually are enshrining the past, right? And it's like, well, that's the whole problem with being wrong about regulation. It's like, oh, this is the way it's going to be for all time. You're like, oh, no. We can invent much better things in the future. We just need to get there. So I think that's been the silver lining in what has otherwise been a pandemic hurricane. But I think that there will be benefit from that felt decades from now.
Here's a question from Jali Cow. As an investor, how do you view first entrepreneur versus serial entrepreneur? How do you assess those without track records for building companies?
So, great question. Generally speaking, one of the things that I have a preference in both categories, but it's part of what you have to really look for in the first-time entrepreneurs, is how aggressive and fast are they as learners? Because literally, it's like you're not learning so much except for maybe between the ages of 2 and 3, because a lot of, like, not only is there a new set of skill sets for you, which you can't have done before because you haven't done the founding game before. Even when you went and worked in a startup, maybe you were employee number 6, maybe you were employee number 20, and you were doing it. Now you're making calls. The market's different. The technology is different. The go-to-market strategies are different. Like all kinds of things. And so you're each of these games, and you have to keep this mindset when you get to a serial entrepreneur, is you're learning this new game. And part of learning the new game is figuring out which of the lessons you learned earlier don't quite apply anymore. That's the way it worked then, but doesn't work that way now, and that works differently now. And sometimes they're major and sometimes they're minor, but in any case, it's that constant learning mindset. And so I look for that learning mindset. I look for a combination of persistence and flexibility. It's like, look, I've really thought through it. I've got a vision. I'm going to it. But by the way, I'm learning. I'm paying attention. That's like to the earlier question about reality right now and going. It's like, well, what about this challenge? Like when I was in that PayPal board meeting and I was saying, okay, you're going to launch with on Palm Pilots as splitting the dinner bill in cash. Well, I bet you here we are on Palo Alto, Palm Center, Palm Center of the universe. We walk to every restaurant, we'll find maximum 1 table where everyone has a Palm Pilot, frequently 0. Your use case doesn't work, you're dead on arrival. Great, we'll sync through email. And you have to be in that constant kind of iterative learning cycle, which isn't entirely just like watch what happens in the market. It's talk to the smartest people you know. When you talk to them, you ask them, what's wrong with my idea? What do I need to improve? How will I break? And that's part of that learning mindset you look for early entrepreneurs. And that's part of like people, it's funny to listen to people mishear fail fast. You fail fast in order to succeed. You're looking for all the points you might fail to hit them as early as possible to adjust, right, in terms of what you're doing. And that's the kind of thing that you're looking for. And by the way, you reference check on, and that you see in your discussions about the idea and what it could do, and what challenges. Like part of the reason you ask challenges as a potential venture partner is to say, hey, what about this? And that's like, look, am I smart about it? Are you smart about it? Are we partnering well together, etc.
So there are quite a few questions on this next topic. So I found one that I think is a good starting point, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about your thoughts here. I recently this is from an anonymous attendee, but I recently became an investor in your VC SPAC RTP. I was curious about your thoughts on SPACs in general and the pros and cons of publicly traded VC PE funds.
So part of the reason I started doing SPACs last year, I didn't anticipate it would be 2021 would be the year of the SPAC. It was just this interest in what happens. There's this fake story that's told about technology companies, which is like you discover your product market fit, and then you just work like hell, and it grows, and it's a stable thing. And actually, in fact, all these technology companies are constant cycles of invention and reinvention, right? Reinvention is changing your go-to-market, changing your business model, changing your fundamental component of how the service goes together. They all do it. Google started as an enterprise search company where the public web page was just a product demo, right, for what it was doing. And cycles of invention and reinvention. Invention when you add markets and you add new product lines and so forth. And what we realized was there was this kind of fiction around the IPO, which is like, oh, well, it's only when we're totally built and stable. And actually, in fact, more companies should come to public markets. The public should have a chance to learn and participate in these. And that part of what was needed to happen was a reinvention of the kind of the IPO process and add some that. And SPACs could be a very good way of doing that. It's just that we want to take a venture mindset. It isn't the trade in the year. It's what are you building over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years in terms of doing it. Find those right technology companies. We as protagonists, as investors, and also as operators and builders and founders would be the right kind of partners in order to do this. And that's what we're going to go kind of bring to the market. And that's what we're doing with reinvent technology partners across the different SPACs. And of course, part of that is kind of sorting through all the things that are happening now. Now, I think the SPACs this year are going to have a whole range of things. I think there are going to be some really magnificent outcomes, some refinements about what kinds of things about bringing companies in this process. The public market have now opened up the funnel, made the world better, made public markets better, made product and offerings better, made capital participation more broad-based and demographic. And then there will also be some things that will be, failure points. SPACs that will have failed to do their due diligence, will have taken a company public they shouldn't have taken public yet. Some like where's the area where the risks are okay? Like to some degree, it got too anti-risked for the IPO, like participate very, very late. Now some more risks in the SPAC side, but which ones are good and which one aren't, we'll be figuring out and refining, and to behave well on that. And so, we've obviously got a lot of demand for it, which I think is partially this function of the fact that the IPO process has gotten too restricted. Of like, we're only going to bring out the technology company only when it's totally fully baked. It's like, no, mostly baked works too in a portfolio set. And that we should allow the public markets and everyone else, like every individual participates, to do that. And now we have to be VCs at this scale as well. And that's what I think is my perspective on what on the transformation we are in SPACs going on in 2021.
Thank you. We've got another anonymous question. How did LinkedIn prevent copycats in the early days? What was your strategy if someone copied LinkedIn when you were just?
So you can't, generally speaking, the general answer is you can't really prevent copycats. It's one of the reasons why one of the true things you have to be very good at as an entrepreneur is speed and strategic intelligence, because it just like there isn't, like people say, oh, I got patents. That doesn't really make any difference really in most things. So may make a difference in like chips and hardware and other and biopharmaceuticals, but in a lot of the software stuff, it doesn't really. There's tons of patents. There's a patent for a one-click purchase, from Amazon. Remember that kind of thing? It's like, okay, and so. Sorry, this is we now had a perfect Zoom moment, which is my internet literally kicked out, and I was like reaching for my phone to dial back in. Right? Welcome to 2020 and 2021. Apologies about that. Right. So sorry, I missed the last question. I finished my answer. I may have not gotten to you.
I think where we cut off, Reid, was when you were speaking about how the Amazon one-click patent wasn't going to work. So yes. Patenting is sort of not the answer to preventing copycats. So
right. So speed, strategy, and that's how, and especially in software and consumer, that's how you essentially go forward. There's no other real ways to prevent copycats. And LinkedIn had tons of competition. Right, like at least 10 to 20 companies were competing with LinkedIn in various ways back then. So next question.
Great. So the next question is from Felipe Lopez. What is your current view on Blitz scaling? Has it changed since you wrote your book?
Well, not fundamentally. Fundamentally is, in these, like we live in a more globally connected world, hyper-connected, competition comes from more and more places. Speed to scale is the thing that most matters. You have Glengarry Glen Ross markets, first prize Cadillac, second prize steak knives, third prize you're fired. That's more and more the shape of this competition in a hyper-connected world. Now, that being said, of course, how you blitzscale, what the relative speed metric is, changes in different circumstances. So you'd say, well, okay, it still matters that I move faster relative to my competition now in pandemic land, but pandemic land, maybe it makes more of a difference to say I'm moving faster than them, but I'm being more cautious about my reserves. I'm being more cautious about my planning, about which things are my takeoff moments, because the ground is changing so much. Like my measurement of, do I have product market fit? It's like, well, actually, in fact, it might be noisy given the pandemic. It might be a supply chain thing, might be breaking somewhere else. And so you're making yourself more resilient than fast in certain ways because of the pandemic. Now, that's still the case. Is speed to scale still the fundamental principle what matters? But you might say, well, okay, I'm not gonna, like, as opposed to like going to 120% throttle, I'm gonna operate at 90% throttle. I'm still operating faster throttle than other folks because I'm baking in more resilience to what I'm doing. So and you know, that's a high level principles general answer. But the reason why for the high level principles, that really depends on, well, where are you at? What do the risks and resilience look like for you and your business? What does the competition look like for you and your business? What are the capital reserves that you have and the market has in order to provide you in your decisions and choicing in terms of how you're doing, and how are you playing for it? But you know, it's but so it's still fundamental, yes, on blitzscaling. Some additional variables given the current state of affairs.
All right, so this is just, I'm going to summarize a whole bunch of questions here. What is like an interesting technology that is exciting to you right now? Like, what should people be looking at?
Well, part of what's stunning about modern times is that that's a list, right? Because you can say, well, artificial intelligence, well, crypto, well, synthetic biology, well, we continue to do cloud and mobile, and you just keep going. Autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things. It's like, oh my God, there's so much stuff happening. And so you try to make the bets as smart as you can. I tend to think still a lot in what are the things that is redefining human space and the things that touch that. So I've been doing a lot in human mobility, like Aurora and so forth for autonomous vehicles. But I think that's it's literally there are so many different massive technological transformations that were going on in parallel, that the whole notion of, oh, now is the time of the semiconductor, now is the time of enterprise software, and now is the time of clean tech, it's going. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff happening in nuclear fission and fusion, right? I mean, there's just tons and tons of things.
This is another summary question. We're getting lots of questions about your bookshelf. What books do you recommend to the students and people on this call?
Look, book recommendations depend a lot on people, and part of these books are actually books that I sometimes when I have a 15-minute break, I go and so I'm reading through them myself. A few of them are also there to have varied, like, for example, like the Watchmen graphic novels behind me. And that's because, look, you shouldn't just read like how-to business books. You should read things that excite intellectual curiosity and so forth. And the Watchmen is like a seriously interesting piece of literature in comic form, which like most people don't fully realize much. I mean, the HBO series is amazing, but like much better than the movies and all the rest. But, like, for example, Thinking Fast or Thinking Slow or Taleb's Anti-Fragile or other kinds of things as ways of thinking about this, and so that's part of the reason why for books, and that's a good prompt. Maybe I should actually start doing some kind of book reviews and book prompts, more book stuff, on blogs and other things. I don't do it on Masters of Scale. The only book stuff we do is through Rapid Response, but because we do Entrepreneurs of Building Scale, but like maybe more on LinkedIn and so forth.
All right, we may have time for one or two more questions. I like this. This is a creative question. What is the nicest thing someone has ever done for you?
Wow. I mean, actually, I think I've been blessed with a lot of very good friends. I guess, and tons of things. And sometimes it's the small things that are really amazing. Like, kind of coming and sitting, just kind of saying, oh, you look like you're having a really bad day. I'm going to come over and, and drink a glass of wine with you and just be there with you. Obviously, this is pre-pandemic. And, like I can remember those things. And sometimes it's I've arranged a magical trip to Antarctica. And I was like, I've never thought I would go to Antarctica. Please come. And they're like, and you went to Antarctica and you realize it's the closest to getting on another planet that you are on this one, with the safety of being on this planet. And it's totally transformative. And I never would have done it if I wasn't. So it's a whole range of things. But I think it's a very good thing to be thinking, how can I be magical to other people? Because I add so much more joy and meaning to the world. So that I love the basis of the question. And I think it's a very good way for everyone to go through life. I try to do it myself.
All right, we're just about out of time. Dean Rajan, do you have any final questions or comments?
Mute. Oh, mute. Yep.
Oh, okay, now we're good. So you had a great answer to our students on what would it take to become a good entrepreneur. And I want to know, is there a path to becoming a good VC? Or because it seems like unlike other professions, you do certain things, you kind of get there. What makes a good VC?
VC is one of the various hardest things to predict. And sometimes you think founders are the right thing, and no, a lot of founders aren't very good investors and so forth. I think what we have found in the Valley is the most reliable thing is to start angel investing. And if you don't have a capital for that, sometimes there's firms like Village Global and so forth that can provide capital if you have a connection to them, because there's some pattern of that too. If you don't, you can be advising and get advisory shares and work for that. And then see that path. And then that path in that partnership, your judgment, your decisioning, how the entrepreneur found you useful in doing. By the way, usually if these deals get to VC, the VCs seeing you operate. And that's usually where VCs kind of recruit from, because they go, oh, you're being really helpful. Like the thing you're doing is much like what I do, but you have that capability of going to, because VCs, unlike angel investors, who kind of can like take 100 bets, it's like we take one bet. Like I go, okay, what's going to transform the trucking industry? Convoy, one bet. And so you do that one bet, and that's what VC is. And can you participate in that? And then that's what gets there.
So I want to thank you on behalf of the school. I want to thank Manish for arranging this read. This was incredibly insightful, great for our students to be able to listen to someone who has truly transformed the world that we are in. So it's a great honor. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, Reid.
My pleasure, and you guys do great work. So it's my honor to do this, and hello to the community. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so
much. And I just wanted to re-echo my thanks to you, Reid, from the Polsky Center. And thank you to everyone who showed up today for this event. We really appreciate your support.